Jeremy. I left the house around noon to grab some lunch for me and my wife. As the garage door screeched open, I got so caught up thinking to myself that I should really call someone to repair it that I nearly backed over my wife as she walked by in the driveway. "What the hell, Doug?" she shouted. I apologized and said I was just distracted and didn't see her. I told her I'd be back with some hot food. "Well, maybe watch where you're going on the way there, you doofus," she winked, and I rolled my eyes, waving her goodbye. I got to a nearby fast food place, pulled into the drive-thru lane, and waited for the cars ahead of me to finish. A few minutes later, as I placed my order, a young girl, maybe 9, walked around from behind the restaurant and approached my car, her tired eyes catching mine. In a very lethargic tone, she asked if I could get her something to eat. There was a weariness in her voice that was so sad to hear. I told her yes, and that I could get her a chicken sandwich if that was okay. "Yes, chicken? Chicken is fine," she rasped, her words carrying a weight that didn't quite line up with her age. I finished my order, and she solemnly made her way to a curb across the parking lot, taking a seat, eyes fixed on the ground. I drove ahead, paid, and collected my food. Driving up to where she sat, I rolled down the window to hand her the sandwich. She grabbed it from me aggressively, ripping it away from my hand. Without a second thought, she began to unwrap it, frantically. I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. "I'm sorry you're so hungry. Maybe I should have gotten you another," I started, but my words trailed off. She started to squeeze the sandwich between her hands, inexplicably. The bun, the sauce, the meat, all mashed together as if in some peculiar ritual. "Hey, what are you doing?" My concern mingled with confusion. She paid no attention to me, her gaze fixed on the mangled food in her hands. Her movements grew more intense, hands twisting and grinding, eyes closed as if she were in a trance. She began to mumble to herself, a disjointed stream of words that seemed to hold a strange significance. Then, as suddenly as it began, she stopped. Her eyes flew open and they met mine, a gaze sharp and piercing. Every ounce of blood left my face. I heard the girl speak, but her lips had not moved. "She's dead now. You should have fixed it sooner." Her words filled me with horror. The coldest fear poured over me, and I sped out of the parking lot towards home. I turned sharply into the driveway, heart pounding, to see the girl's dark omen realized. My wife was pinned beneath the garage door, lying motionless. I rushed out to her, screaming, crying as I held her lifeless body, the girl's words roaring in my head. Since the accident, I've described that girl to everyone I know and run into around town, and no one has ever seen her. I don't know what form of evil I encountered that day, but I still look for her, convinced I'll find her sitting alone somewhere, ready to bring death to another unsuspecting soul. She took more than my wife that day. She took my happiness. She took my sanity. Julia. Around 2 months ago, I was headed to the airport to fly to a conference for work. It was still dark, around 5:30 a.m., and I quickly got off the highway to swing by a drive-thru for a coffee. As I ordered, I noticed a black hearse pull in behind me. Immediately feeling creeped out, I pulled ahead to the window, trying to convince myself that the driver must just be starting the day early. After a couple minutes of waiting, I paid, was handed my coffee, and pulled away to leave. Strangely, the hearse didn't pull forward to the window, and instead, like me, headed for the exit, its yellow lights tailing me. Unease gnawed at me. I went through a few intersections, continuing to glance in the rearview mirror, watching the hearse lurk at a distance. The whole thing felt so off, like something out of a bad dream. I merged back onto the highway and watched the dark hearse climb the on-ramp behind me. I gradually increased my speed, changing lanes, but the hearse did not let up, never getting too close, but always there, like a shadow in pursuit. My nerves were shot. I was practically hypnotized by those lights in my mirror, trying to shake the feeling that I was now being hunted. Looking back to the road ahead, like a sick joke, I plowed right into a closed-off construction zone, sending cones and orange barriers flying. It was chaos. My car hit loose gravel, slid sideways, and collided with a dump truck. Airbags exploded into the cabin, smoke from the hood filled the air, and I was dazed and battered. After what felt like only a few seconds, my door flung open. A man wearing a black suit and black gloves yanked me out from my seat by my hair. Pain shot through me, and as I was dragged through the gravel, it finally hit me what was going on. I started screaming, but we were too far from the highway. The loud passing cars were oblivious. He dragged me towards the hearse. I was terrified, sick with dread. He pulled me around the back and then popped the trunk. I looked up to him in horror. Then a bright light cut through the darkness and shone on the man holding me. A voice shouted, "Hey, get away from her!" The man in black immediately let go, and I crumpled to the ground. He slammed the trunk, sprinted to his door, quickly got in and peeled away. A construction worker rushed over to me. He knelt down to me and assured me I was safe and that help was coming. The last thing I remember was him calling 911 and talking to the dispatcher as he covered me with his coat, and I fell unconscious. I came to in a busy hospital room, apparently several hours after being transported there. The doctor told me I had several deep cuts that had been stitched up, 2 broken ribs, and a dislocated shoulder, but that I would fully recover in time. The police eventually came into my room and took down every detail I could give. With physical therapy and weekly counseling, I'm healing from the shock of that night, but I keep watching for news that the man in the hearse has been caught. But no news yet. Thomas. I was 20 years old and visiting my grandparents for the weekend. They had just moved south to get away from the cold winters, and so I hadn't been to their new place or even seen their new town yet. At around 10:30 p.m. on Saturday night, I pulled out of my grandparents' driveway in their car to get some late-night food. The town streets were empty, and after 5 minutes driving towards town, I found a fast food place. I approached the drive-thru. The bright neon sign flickered overhead, creating dark shadows across the pavement. A tired voice came over the intercom. "Hello, let me know when you're ready with your order." I scanned the menu and ordered a burger and waffle fries. She told me the total and to pull ahead. But then, just as I drove away from the intercom, I could hear the woman say, Get away from me!" I stopped my car and listened intently, but there was just silence. My heart started to beat quickly, and I had chills creep across my neck. As I eased off the brake, I looked ahead to the window and wondered if I actually heard the words that I thought I did. I pulled up to the window, and the longer I waited, the more I convinced myself it was probably just a coworker playing a prank on another. 8 minutes stretched out like an eternity. I was going back and forth in my own mind, going from believing I had heard true desperation in her voice to imagining she was just fed up with a coworker harassing her after a long day of work. Just as I was about to give up and drive away, a man walked into view from inside, bag in hand and a pep in his step. He approached the window, and the glass pane slid open. The man wore a crooked employee's hat and an apron that hung haphazardly over his tattered street clothes. His face was bright with a large, toothy smile, glistened with sweat, with almost glee in his eyes. "Here's your order, sir," he chimed in a cheery voice. I stammered, "Oh, but I haven't paid yet." He waved it away and insisted, "Due to the unusually long wait, your food is on the house tonight." Unease and confusion prickled at my skin, but his insistence threw me off, and so I reluctantly accepted the bag. He waved me goodbye, slid the window pane shut, and stood there, watching me drive away. Driving back to my grandparents' house, my fingers trembled on the wheel. The whole encounter gnawed at me. I was so confused about what had just happened. I pulled into my grandparents' driveway, parked the car, grabbed the bag from the passenger seat, and opened it. A single large item was in the bag, wrapped in tinfoil. Immediately annoyed about the missing fries, I unwrapped the foil, and my breath hitched. Laying within the crumpled, dull metal lay a human heart, slick with blood. A scream tore through me. I dropped the heart back into the bag, flinging it away from me. Without a thought, I fled the car, sprinting towards my grandparents' house. The phone clutched in my hand felt heavy as I dialed the police. My voice trembled as I told them the story, and I fell into my grandfather's arms once off the phone. The police arrived, and I tried to give them the exact account of what I heard and saw. They were also speaking over their radio with the other officers at the fast food place. They found 2 bodies behind the counter. But the man from the window, the one with the manic eyes and the crazed smile, was nowhere to be found. I gave every detail I could summon, every nuance etched in my mind, but they never were able to find him. My grandparents moved about a year later, saying the town never felt the same after that night. Sophia. Around 8 p.m., I pulled into a drive-thru, craving a quick, easy meal after a long day working at the hospital. I placed my order, pulled ahead to the window, and a smiling attendant appeared. I paid him for the food, and he asked how my day had been. I sighed, confessing to the stress of the high-pressure job. His sympathetic tone warmed me, and he asked if I was heading home to unwind. I nodded, mentioning a show I'd planned to binge-watch. Once the attendant returned with my order, he paused for a moment, and a warm smile spread across his face. "You know what? You like chocolate?" he asked. I nodded again, and he said, "1 second." A minute later, he handed me a tall chocolate milkshake, on the house, wishing me a great night. "Well, I hope I get to see your beautiful face again sometime soon." "Thank you," I mumbled, feeling a twinge of awkwardness at his parting words. I drove home, excited to relax with my food and the anticipated show. I got inside, dimmed the lights, and settled in. Somewhere between the second and third episodes, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a dreamless sleep. I awoke abruptly around 11:30 p.m. The TV was still on, but dimmed, casting shadows across the room. Groggy, I moved to clean up the remnants of my meal, but accidentally knocked over the half-empty milkshake. Cursing under my breath, I bent down to retrieve the fallen cup, only to find it strangely disassembled. My heart pounded. There on the floor lay a second bottom to the cup and an unfamiliar Apple AirTag. Dread crawled up my spine. Panic set in. I scanned the room, my senses on high alert. I looked to the dark windows, expecting to see a face peering in at me, but saw nothing. Then, a loud creak from the hallway. Without thinking, I lunged for my phone on the couch and bolted towards the back door. I could hear the living room door slam open behind me and rapid footsteps in pursuit. I fumbled for a moment, trying to unlock the door, my trembling hands betraying me. Once I got it open, I turned to see the attendant from the fast food store, his eyes wild with intent, reaching out to grab onto me. My scream pierced the night air. His hand grabbed the hood of my zip-up sweatshirt, but it unzipped and came off easily as I pushed forward through the door. I ran, barely keeping my feet in the slick grass, towards my neighbor's house. Desperation fueled every step. I reached their front door and began pounding with my fists frantically. Panic washed over me as I turned to look back at my house, but in the darkness, I couldn't spot the intruder. The door swung open, and my neighbors swiftly pulled me inside, sensing my distress. They wasted no time dialing the police. With the help of management at the fast food place, the man was apprehended that very night, miles away from our small town. The nightmare was over, but being tracked back to my own home created a lasting fear that I can't escape. Carson. I was working my first full shift at the McDonald's drive-thru as the sun began to set in the sky. I stood at the drive-thru window register, waiting for the next order. A weathered voice came through my headset that was choked with emotion. Struggling to maintain composure, the man placed his order. 2 cheeseburgers, 2 medium fries, an apple pie, and a vanilla cone. It was almost too much for him, and he nearly broke down crying multiple times. "Of course, sir. No problem at all," I assured him. "Just pull up to the window and we'll get you that food as soon as we can." As he approached, I could see the tear stains on the old man's cheeks, and my heart ached for him. I gave him the total, collected the money, and assured him that his order would be ready shortly. Just as I was about to close the window, he spoke, his voice heavy with regret. "I'm sorry I'm not being all together," he said, his eyes glistening. He went on to explain that his wife, his partner in life since high school, had passed away just 2 weeks prior. This visit was the first time he'd come to this restaurant without her. They had a tradition, he explained, coming here every Thursday night for the last 2 decades. The same order, every time. They would drive to Lover's Point, walk out on the old, weathered rail bridge, and watch the sunset behind the trees. They'd sit with their legs dangling through the bars, sharing food and laughter, cherishing each other's company. He missed her terribly, he admitted, the pain unbearable. Touched, I told him to hold on for a moment and rush to gather his food. Returning, I shared my sentiment about how he was honoring her memory. He nodded, sniffed hard, and said, "Thank you for the words, son. I'll tell her tonight that we got a friendly one this time." He picked up the bag of food and set it down on the passenger seat, atop a pile of some thick rope. I caught sight of the rope and a flicker of confusion passed over my face. The old man noticed and quickly said, "Oh, that's just to keep me from falling in and getting wet. Wouldn't want to end up in the water, you know." I chuckled, a nervous laugh to break the tension. "Of course, safety first. Goodbye, sir. Wishing you all the best." "Goodbye, young man. Thank you for helping me today," he said, and then he was gone. Later that night, as my shift ended, I sat in the dark for a moment in my car, the memory of the old man and his poignant story still fresh in my mind. Without much thought, I started the engine and headed to the abandoned rail bridge near Lover's Point. I parked in the overgrown lot and made my way onto the old bridge. In the middle, I found it, his bag of fast food, its contents spilling out, half-eaten and abandoned. Looking for signs of the old man, it took only a moment to spot the rope. One end tightly looped around a rusty steel beam. The rest of it, stiff with weight, descending into the darkness below.